Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining. My name is John Gestel. I'm our client relations coordinator here. Joining me as always is Rob Bernhard, corporate counsel for Royalty Exchange, and then Dayton O'Connor, our lead analyst. So for this webinar, we are going back to our regular office hours Q&A method. So there's no presentation for this one. We've got a bunch of interesting subjects to discuss and a bunch of your submitted questions that we're going to go over as well. If you do have questions for us during the webinar, please submit them through the Q&A option of the webinar rather than through the chat or anything like that. The Q&A is just a bit more simple and easy for us to manage. So without much further ado, we can get started here. So what we'll do, like always, is we'll just roll through these questions one by one and answer them to the floor. And then, yeah, if you have questions, just send them in. So the first question we have is in regards to dollar age. In terms of how dollar age is computed, how does one project stability of streaming revenue? Which is a great and loaded question. So we do have an article that breaks down the dollar age on the website. It's in the blog page. We can link it in the chat here so that you can have access to it. But it is a weighted metric that takes into account the release date for a song, its contributions to the earnings, several other factors, but those are kind of the big two, because that will kind of impact where in the lifespan of a song's release you may exist. So that's really what we're doing with the dollar age, is kind of trying to measure where along the release life a song is currently earning. As I'm sure many of you know, in the early release of a song, it typically has a pretty large spike in earnings. That's, when it hits radio, it gets maybe on playlists, it's very popular. And then the earnings will drop off after, I would say, roughly a 1 to 3 year window. So they'll drop off and then typically stabilize at a certain level, which we like to call the tail of earnings naturally. And the dollar age helps us measure where along that tail you might be. The tail, that's the consistent part. So that's the rough analysis of what the dollar age is. For deeper internal computational analysis, I would say to read that article. We provide the formula for it, what goes into it, the caveats, things like that. So we'll link that in the chat in just a second here. Robert, Dayton, do either of you have anything to add to dollar age just while we're on the subject?
Yeah, I would say just a little bit of context on, the reason we calculated it, because we wanted to figure out, hey, what are some of the things that are most likely to correlate with returns going forward, right? So it's like, okay, is it a genre most correlate? But we kind of came up with this concept of the dollar age, and we've tested it several times, and it really does seem like it correlates well with future earnings. So the longer a song has been earning, the more likely it is to keep earning and is more consistent in the future.
Dayton, anything from you?
Nothing for me.
Okay, great. And I just linked in the chat there. If any of you want to take a look, that article is pretty great explainer for dollar age. Next one we have here is, what is the minimum dollar amount needed to invest in a royalty? And that really depends on the asset that you're interested in. This is a pretty common question that we get. We have a huge range of prices. The real caveat is that all assets have to be purchased in their entirety. So when you talk about a minimum, it's really what can you get for the asset. On the low end, assets will normally transact in like the $5,000 to $10,000 range, kind of depending on the asset itself. So normally the answer to that question is around $5,000, but it really depends on what you're interested in and how saleable it actually is. Next question here, how long does it take after I purchase for me to receive my portion? This also depends on the asset. So as many of you know, we work with lots of different royalty collection agencies, and they all work a little bit differently on a little bit of a different schedule. And that includes how frequently they distribute royalties. So while one company may pay every month, another company may pay once a year. On every listing, we'll denote what the frequency is that you should expect from that. And then depending on when you purchase and when the next distribution is, will kind of dictate how long it takes for you to start collecting. Most royalty companies will have their schedule posted on their site. So you can always check the website, their respective websites. Like for example, ASCAP or BMI will have theirs public. The most common distribution frequency is quarterly. So going into it, probably expect quarterly. But again, it can vary, totally varies.
And
yeah.
to kind of go along with that, when you are looking at a listing on Royalty Exchange, every listing you see reflects the most recent pay period. So you'll always see the most recent earnings, and then if you are the purchaser, if your offer is accepted, you will receive the next payment. So you'll always be looking at the most recent earnings, and then you'll be entitled to all the payments that are paid after your purchase. So that's kind of important to keep in mind. Sometimes the payment date is really close to when the purchase happens, and in all situations, what we do is we withhold a percentage of the seller's proceeds to take care of any payments that might still go to the seller if the timelines on us submitting the paperwork doesn't give the distributor enough time to update their records. So it's important to note that everything you're looking at on the website is the most recent earnings data, and then you are entitled to the next payment whenever that happens. And then the listings will always be updated when the new payment comes out, and activity on those listings will be frozen or taken down, kind of depending on the type.
Perfect. So I see there's a couple of submitted questions coming in. We're going to roll through a few more of these, and then we'll get to your submitted questions. So next one we have here is investing in IP assets requires a robust sourcing network. Would you say Royalty Exchange fits that criteria, and how so? Great question. So we do have full-time staff who are dedicated to bringing more royalty assets to Royalty Exchange. So yes, I would say that we do fit into what you would consider a robust sourcing network. I would say kind of beauty of what we do is that it is a very valuable service for artists. So a lot of the artists we work with come to us because they've heard from someone else they've worked with about what a great experience they've had with us, how simple we made everything, all that. So while yes, we do have full-time staff that's sourcing, a lot of what we get is referral based too. People who had a bad experience somewhere else and heard that they could have a good one with us. So that's helped tremendously. And it's kind of led to a lot of organic growth of Royalty Exchange, which is really nice to see. Robert, Dayton, do you guys have anything to add about our sourcing?
Nope.
Cool.
Yep.
Next one here. How do you think inflationary pressures and the macroeconomic conditions have affected investment in music royalties? Great question. Also pretty loaded question. We honestly haven't seen much of an impact from macroeconomic inflationary pressure, to be entirely honest. Most investors are funding this stuff themselves and are, I would say, individuals or high net worth individuals. We do have several institutional buyers involved as well, but the interest rate environment hasn't impacted their purchasability or purchase power and the returns they're getting much at all. I mean, you can get a savings account at 4%, but you can get a royalty at 8 to 10%. So it's not changed a whole lot. Yeah, just not from where we stand. Hasn't changed a whole lot. Dana, Rob, you guys have anything to add to that?
Just to chime in on the asset itself, the royalty income streams, as we touch on pretty frequently during these quarterly office hours calls, they're not usually subject to inflationary pressures themselves. So the organizations that are making these kinds of distributions, their royalty payments that they make to their members and clients are not impacted by like the larger macroeconomic environment. They have licenses in place through which they secure the revenue, which they then turn into a royalty, which they pay out and distribute. And it is oftentimes unaffected by what's happening in the broader environment. And that includes the effective interest rates that could change over the long term, but it's certainly not something that we've seen and not something we'd expect to see in the normal course with these royalties that are paid out.
Yep. Cool. All right, next question here. Can I resell parts of my royalties again? Yes, you can. On royalty exchange, you can resell any asset that you purchased on royalty exchange. There are even cases where you can, split a catalog in half and sell half of it. So I would say always reach out to us and ask, what can I do with this? Our default is to relist anything you buy on behalf of investors, so that way they have access to liquidity. We think that's super, super important. So that will be the default. If you don't want your asset listed, tell us, if we won't list it. But again, liquidity is important. So yes, you can resell parts of your royalties again. Next question here. What is the trend you are seeing in valuations on the exchange? How have higher interest rates impacted valuations? Another good question, another loaded question. I would say the trend in valuations on the exchange has been increasing. As we've been growing, we attract higher quality catalogs, bigger catalogs, a wider variety of catalogs, and that attracts more buyers who are willing to pay a higher multiple. So valuations and prices have been going up as a result of both of those things. Now, again, how the higher interest rates impacted valuations, they haven't really, at least not yet that we've been seeing. But all in all, the baseline market is growing. And so that's leading to increases across the board. Dana, Rob, you have anything you want to add on to that?
Nope.
Cool. Next one here, another loaded question. Where do you see the industry in 5 or 10 years? Well, there's a lot of different ways we could answer that. I mean, personally, I think it's just focused on streaming right now. There was lots of emerging markets all over the world that are getting access to streaming, the tools to access streaming, things like that. Tools are getting better for artists to create more content that will appeal to more people in more places who have more access to streaming services. So look at streaming. Goldman Sachs's analysis every year on the state of the music business is really great. I mean, I think every year for the past 5 years, they've made an initial projection on the increase, and then they've gone back and increased their projection. I think every year. So yeah, look at streaming. Streaming is the immediate future. Then of course, you can get into larger conversations around like the metaverse and what all that means. But 5 to 10, I think streaming. Rob, Dayton, you guys have thoughts?
I want to add to that. I think one thing you probably safely count on is growth and maturity in international markets, and that probably being a more important contributor to overall listenership and where that revenue is coming from. Where services like Spotify, a lot of the DSPs, they've got a global footprint, but they don't have the same kind of entry into a lot of the other larger international markets that they do in the US. So expect them to continue to grow there. I would also say, the future is kind of impossible to predict in terms of, what's going to be happening, especially 10 years down the line, right? Who could have said maybe 5 years ago that TikTok would be as big a contributor to what's happening in the industry as it is right now in terms of both where money is coming from, but also how trends are being shaped and how listenership is being defined as a category. The growth in catalog, I don't think anyone that would have predicted if you were talking about this 5-10 years ago. So there's going to be a lot of stuff that happens, that we can speculate about, but there's going to be a lot of things that come up, especially as there are new models in which listenership and music consumption is sent through that we have no visibility into right now. So it's going to be exciting, and there's probably going to be a lot more growth, but who can really say?
Yeah. Of course, the classic caveat of, sorry, Rob, just go ahead.
Well, no, I think to go along with that is more and more transparency. I think we've seen with the streaming, creators can go and see, how many times their song has been played in a certain period of time. And along with that, we've seen creators' piece of the pie going up and up as well. So it's kind of, a rising sea lifts all boats kind of thing. And I would expect more and more of that. You see last year we had the big CRB determinations to affirm the past 5 years increase, and then the settlement that approved the next 5 years. So there's a little more stability as far as on the digital mechanical space as well. So I think it's the trends are good for creators, and certainly that will help their royalty streams as well.
Awesome. Yeah, classic caveat. The guy I was going to say is that we cannot predict the future. Royalties may go up or down. We do not know what's going to happen. But next question. How have transaction volumes changed in the last 18 months? What are the other assets you are looking at monetizing on the exchange? So volumes have been increasing, both in what's going live as well as what's being sold. And again, that's just a function of the market growing, and it's growing all over the place. Now, what other assets are you looking to monetize? There are several. I mean, I'm sure many of you have seen already the standardized testing royalty that's up, which is, who knew that royalty existed. We've had the YouTube stuff going up. You'll probably see more YouTube stuff in the next year or so. A lot more film and TV stuff. We'll kind of see what happens with the strikes going on in Hollywood and how that impacts what we bring and what we can bring. But yeah, I mean, we're looking at monetizing and bringing lots of more diversity of royalty assets. Of course, music is always going to be there. It's the bulk of what we offer. But I mean, I think the standardized testing, the Cherry Garcia, the Listerine stuff, I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg. So we'll probably see more and more of those, especially as, there's a proven market for it. See more and more of those assets crop up. Rod Dayton, anything you guys got to add to that? Cool.
Nope.
Great. Next question here. How to assess the value of investment in the forecast on the future revenue/profit? Dayton, you want to talk about forecasting?
Yeah, I mean, we're not in a position to tell you how to value these kinds of assets. We want to provide our investors with as much information as we can make available in terms of historic earnings, the trends that can be seen when you take a look at the data that's associated with an asset. It is been discussed in a number of places that you can use a model of discounted cash flows to take a look at how to forecast and view these earnings, but it's up to the individual investor how they're assessing what the value of an investment is for a given asset on the exchange.
Awesome. Next one here. How do you value future earnings on non-music offers such as Cherry Garcia or standardized tests? Oh, that's a good question too. Dayton, go ahead.
I feel that kind of is sort of responded to in line with the prior question as well. I mean, obviously, each asset on the exchange, can be evaluated on an asset by asset basis, and that applies to both the music and the non-music assets that we offer. And as with the music assets, we try to offer as much transparency as possible for anything that goes up onto the exchange, even for the non-music IP related assets that we have, such as Cherry Garcia or the standardized tests. But much with the music assets, we can't tell you how to value those. That's up to the individual investor.
Yeah, one thing I would say is that while we do provide an effective dollar age for those, it's important to remember that these are consumed fundamentally differently from music, where our dollar age trend and weighting applies pretty directly to how music is consumed. It doesn't have the same effect for the standardized testing royalty, the Cherry Garcia, stuff like that. I mean, it still is royalties created by the use, but it's not quite the same. So yeah, I would say take everything with a grain of salt, but look at those for what they are. I mean, they're both super, super strong, super compelling. If you haven't already read the standardized testing deal memo, which is linked on the listing, take a read through that and how that royalty works. Because just because they're non-music, just because we can't value them the same way, doesn't mean they aren't just as strong, if not stronger, than a traditional music asset. So I'd say just do your research and be thorough with those. Rob, anything from you on that?
Nope.
Cool. Next question here. Expectations for the fallout from hypnosis. Some reported investor pressures to possibly liquidate catalogs. So what hypnosis is doing and what we offer at Royalty Exchange are pretty fundamentally different. So I don't think that from where we stand, there will be much fallout at all. I mean, hypnosis spread themselves really thin. They paid monster multiples, a monster catalog, and spent hundreds of millions of dollars on stuff. So, I'm not super surprised to hear that they're looking to liquidate stuff. from everything that I've read, and I assume that we've read here, it looks like they're just trying to increase their price per share. So liquidating stuff to do that. But I don't think that it will have much of an impact on what we're doing here. If anything, I think it may drive investors to us who are saying, well, what Hypnosis is doing, these returns are not worth it, but I still want royalty assets. Royalty exchange is a good market to get them. Rob, Dayton, you guys have thoughts on that?
No thoughts from me?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing I would chime in to your point, John, which I think is a good one, like the Hypnosis business model, royalty exchanges business model are fundamentally different. We're both in the, industry of buying and selling music royalty assets, but the type of assets that are trafficked in by Hypnosis, the way that they do business versus the way that our investors on the exchange do business are likely very different. So, what business decisions they make in terms of how they handle their assets, what they do with them, probably doesn't really have much of an impact on how royalty exchange does business and how our investors are treating their own assets.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. Hopefully that answers whoever's question that was. Next question here is, how are royalties paid out? How do I know the royalty stream does not turn out to be a dud? Well, the second half of your question, we can't answer for you. Investors are responsible for doing their own analysis. We cannot make any claims that guarantees the future performance of royalty assets, et cetera, et cetera. How are royalties paid out? Well, if your question is around the collection and distribution of royalties, I again would point you to our walkthroughs on the blog page. We've got a bunch of breakdowns on how royalties are collected and paid out. That includes the different societies that are out there collecting them, what specific rights they oversee, the cash flow of creation to payout of royalties amongst various types. So we've got a bunch of flow charts, very, very clear documents. So I'd say take a look at those. If your question is from an admin perspective for royalty exchange, our admin process is pretty simple and straightforward. You sign a tax document, whether it's a W-9 or a W-8 BEN, depending on if you're a US domestic investor or not. And then we set you up in our admin portal. You specify how you want to collect, banking information, whatever, and that's really it. Then we send you the royalties whenever they come in. So it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, along those lines, we've got a question in the Q&A about the timing. So as part of our marketplace, when you purchase something on royalty exchange becomes the administrator of the payments. What we do is we collect them from the distributor, then pay them out to our investors. And our accounting agreement gives us 30 days from the time we receive the royalties to get them out to investors. Those actual timelines is what the question was about. They're running under 10 days, depending on the distributor, but most of the time it's under 10 days or even under a week for some of the more standard assets we do. So to cover that question.
Yeah, and to add to that, it really does depend on the asset. There are some assets that are with a specific company who we don't have, direct integrations with their system. And so it's a much more manual effort for us to collect everything, review everything, make sure that the portion going to the investor versus the original rights holder is correct, or maybe there's multiple accounts contributing. So there are other ways in which it could extend the timeline. But yeah, like Rob said, I think our average right now is under a week. And as we continue to grow, our systems are going to improve, and that timeline should only get shorter. But yeah. So
yeah, and while we're here, there's another similar question. How can I ensure the royalties that are collected are correct in the amount, and who oversees the accuracy of the PROs? So what we do as the accounting arm, we'll collect the payments. We can hammer out any issues that pop up if we see that a certain song has not been earning, or if an investor has a concern that something has changed over a certain amount of time. We can handle kind of the conversation with the PROs to see, has there been any issue, has there been any change, and do whatever we can to sort that out for the investor.
Cool. All right, next question here. historically, what has music royalty income done during recessions? Is it stable or go down or up? Good question. History tells us that during times of economic distress, escape mediums like movies, music tend to stay strong. I would credit the Hollywood golden age from around the Great Depression as a model, but especially with how accessible music is to people through streaming, things like that. There are free services to access music. I would say it's quite stable in times of economic uncertainty. But that's just looking at history, like we don't know what's going to happen. Maybe it could take a downturn. History tells us that it shouldn't, but it might, right? Dayton or Rob, you guys have anything you want to add to stability?
I'll touch one point briefly. Stability, notwithstanding, I will comment that if we're talking about a recessionary environment, and we do say that music royalty income is largely, disconnected from the larger macro environment, it would likely be the case that if there was a significant recession, it may impact royalties in the way that any business could have their operations affected by what's happening in the rest of the economy. So if there is significant belt tightening at one of these organizations or with the organizations that they collect their revenues from, that could potentially impact their distributions. But that's the kind of thing that you would expect to see across the board in any kinds of these environments. I would also say that we probably don't have like a great recent mapping for a lot of recessions and how that affects music royalty income, because the music royalty income landscape in 2023 is very different than what music royalties looked like back in, say, 2012, which was the last time we had a major recession. Not counting any sort of like short recessions you could look at it, say, like in the COVID period, say in 2020, 2021, where we didn't really see much of an impact because they were pretty small. So likely the case, there would not be major impacts. You would likely see those royalties remain stable. But I don't think that we have a great mapping for it, to be honest.
Yeah. To elaborate on the COVID stuff, though, we did do an analysis on the royalty performance during the COVID era. So what our analysis found was that actually there wasn't much of a change in the overall payouts, really just the medium of use. So things like naturally live performance went way down, but streaming went way up, right? So it did balance out, even though the consumption mediums were different. So again, a testament to streaming, which we've talked about throughout this whole webinar. Streaming makes it easy. It's easy. You don't have to sacrifice music if you have access to streaming services the way you may have had to in the past. So that's why we say keep an eye on it. Next question here. Which of the new CRB3 rates are already paid out? For example, Q1 2023 has paid out with 15.1% or still the old rate at 10.1%? Great question. We have not yet seen the increased rates payouts.
To clarify, the catch-up payment, so as a part of the CRB3 ruling, was some of the distributors had the option of when the CRB3 original ruling was laid down before the appeal, they had the option to pay out at the older rates or the new rates. So if you paid out at the older rates, once the CRB3, which covered it through the end of 2022, once that was finalized, then as a part of that, any distributor royalty payer who did not pay at the new increased rates has to pay a catch-up payment to cover those increased rates over that 5-year period between 2018 and 2022. From what I've heard, I haven't looked at a ton of actual earnings. I don't think we've seen a ton of those catch-up payments come through.
Yeah.
That is a separate thing from CRB4, which was settled and approved, covering the years 2023 through 2027. Now, those rates have all been paid out as normal, starting with the first quarterly payment for 2023.
And I believe we should expect to see some of those catch ups soon. I mean, Dayton, when we were looking at the CRB announcement, they said that they were working on the payout schedule, right?
Yeah, there's a release on the MLC's website dated back to May 2023. At that time, they were still waiting on the finalization of when they were going to be able to pay out those rates. They need to work with the DSPs to address the data that they need to match the performances for the prior period usages before they can make those catch-up payments. I think at that time they said that pending final review, it would take another 6 months or so for them to get that data in place. So I've not heard of the finalization of any of that information. So I'd expect that we're still probably a couple quarters out at least before we see the catch-up payments get addressed for the retroactive.
Cool. Okay, next one here. Is there a music royalty market for German music? How are last 12 months earnings calculated and how accurate is it? Well, last 12 months earnings are the direct last 12 month earnings as per the royalty statements that have been paid to whoever the owner of the asset is. So they are 100% accurate. Is there a music royalty market for German music? Well, certainly we would include German music on royalty exchange. I believe we have before, if I'm not mistaken. We work with artists all over the world. So yeah, if there's a German artist who wants to sell, great, we'll put them up. I mean, I think right now we've got a French hip hop or a French pop artist as their royalties up for sale. So like it's, yeah, I would say us. Next question here. Is this like the foreclosures of the music industry? No, it is not. While there certainly may be artists who are selling their royalties because they are in their own economic distress, I would not say that royalty exchange is like the foreclosures market of music industry. So you could certainly find stuff selling at a premium and certainly stuff that's selling below market value depending on the needs of the seller. I hope that answers your question. Robert, Dayton, do you guys want to speak to that at all?
For me, I mean, look, royalty exchange is a marketplace ultimately. So assets transacted at what the market values them.
Yeah.
So I think that's not exactly the analogous comparison, but let's see where it comes from.
Cool. Next question here. Are off-market deals conducted? No, period. We are an open marketplace. That's how the whole system works and why it works. So we vehemently will not do off-market deals. It just works against the foundations of what royalty exchange is. So yeah, that's a hard no. What is the average investor buying per year? Totally depends on the investor. Some people will spend millions of dollars a year. Some people will spend $10,000 a year. Totally depends on what's available, who's trying to buy, what their strategy is, and any number of other factors. So I don't think we could ascribe an average to it, honestly. And that should be it with the submitted questions. We got a bunch of Q&As here. We'll just start from the top and go through them. Does the analyst benchmark estimate incorporate the effect of diversification within a catalog? No, it does not. It is really just a median market price, a median sale price for catalogs of a similar dollar age cohort and sale price, I believe, right, Dayton? I got that right? Yeah, so it's really just a median. It doesn't do any kind of high level evaluations or anything like that. That's why we say it's just a benchmarking, just a jumping off point. The intrinsic value of any catalog could be higher or lower than the analyst benchmark, depending on the specifics of the catalog. So that's why it's not uncommon to see stuff sell above benchmark or below it. So yeah, benchmark can be very helpful, but again, grain of salt, it's just a median.
And we've actually phased out the terminology of analyst benchmark, where it's a marketplace median to actually describe what it is. So it's the median price on the similar type catalog that we've seen has sold on the marketplace.
Yep. And to that, rebranding of the analyst benchmark to the marketplace median, I'm sure many of you will notice there's a new layout for listings. So go check that out when you have a chance. It should be a bit more comprehensive, easier to navigate, just overall more robust. But next question here.
Hey,
Are
before you go to that one, John, there's another kind of similar one a little bit further down that might make more sense
okay.
to tackle now.
Yeah.
Do you incorporate discounted cash flow valuation techniques into your benchmarking methodology? Could you please elaborate on decay curves, whether forecasting is useful for lower dollar age catalogs? Dayton, you see that one?
I was trying to look for it.
Yeah, it's about the fourth one down the list right now.
Okay, decay curves. Okay, got it. For the to the benchmarking point that we just made, the benchmarking reflects market activity, right? So it's a function of all the sales for those kinds of assets within that particular dollar age cohort that we're taking a look at. Elaborate on decay curves, whether forecasting is useful for low dollar age catalogs. What's tricky about the lower dollar age assets, and this goes to the importance that we put on dollar age and sort of the lifetime and life cycle of these kinds of assets, it's much harder to predict stuff that is lower dollar age because you don't have any sort of established history for what that asset has done before. And you're not going to be able to predict for stuff that is younger how it's going to perform over the next, let's say, a 1-year asset over years 2 and 3 of its life cycle. There are any number of ways that a track or a catalog could perform. So we're talking about music assets. A song is released to radio. That song could continue to rise through the charts or could fall off the charts. You have no way of predicting how that particular song is going to do once it's released as a single. So you have no way of knowing if that's going to be a big hit and then remains in listenership for a long time and develops a fan base, or if it doesn't. That's why the lower dollar age assets command smaller multiples, because they're a lot less predictable in terms of what you can expect for those to get paid out. That's also, I think, why we see a lot of investors place importance on older assets, because once that asset has entered into its long tail of earnings, the value of those future distributions is likely to be a lot more predictable. That's why those older assets command larger multiples, because the expectation is that there's a higher probability of more predictable future distributions. If you're investing in stuff that's lower dollar age, a lot less predictable, so potentially a lot more upside, but potentially a lot more downside.
Yep. Cool. Rob, anything else you want to add to that one? Thanks for grabbing that one.
Nope.
Cool. All right, next one here. Are most available listings on Royalty Exchange posted by individual owners or corporations, for example, record labels? Can you go into a bit of detail on the breakdown? Yeah, so I would say most listings on Royalty Exchange are by individual rights holders. I think it's pretty unusual that we have corporations, record labels, publishers, whatever, selling royalty interests directly.
Yeah, I would say it's probably like 90% the creator who's selling.
I may even say more than that.
Yeah,
you know, like it's pretty unusual. Obviously, you know, there are like exceptions, right? But yeah, the vast majority are individual rights holders. Now, as far as detail in the breakdown, I mean, if you're looking for like what's the rough percentage spread, I mean, yeah, it's like probably 95% creators, maybe even 99%. I mean, going off the top of my head, I could probably count on one hand the amount of direct label or publisher sales. I mean, it's just not many. Yeah, so largely it's individuals. Anything else, Rob, Dayton?
no, that actually kind of flows into the next question on what databases royalty streams are music assets included in. Can the owner of a song get that song added to other sources of revenue to increase the revenue? So because almost all of our assets come from the creator, they will typically have either a recording agreement or a publishing agreement with a label or publisher. And the label or publisher controls the copyrights, controls the licensing authority for those copyrights. So as an investor on Royalty Exchange, you are buying a passive income right to the royalty stream itself. You're not getting a licensing authority. Those will still lie with the labels and publishers, who also have a vested interest into monetizing those assets. But and almost without exception, if you buy an asset on Royalty Exchange, you will not get a licensing authority to go out and further monetize it outside of what the labels and publishers are already doing.
Yeah. So as long as you aren't breaching copyright, something like that. I would say I have heard some creative ideas from investors looking to help supplement things like playlisting, stuff like that. One story I love to tell is this European investor I was talking to. His intention was to buy catalogs and then play them at the nightclubs that he owned, as trying to increase the royalties that way, which I thought was really, really interesting. But again, that's all not licensing control or sourcing or anything like that. So as long as you aren't breaking those rules, you're normally pretty okay.
Yeah, as long as this nightclub has a license with the local PRO.
Yeah. Next question here. Do you use machine learning to analyze music catalogs? Short answer, no. Dayton, tell us about analysis.
I mean, for the analysis that we're doing, I'll caveat that to say we do have a data scientist on staff, to do analysis on various things related to the exchange. But on a catalog by catalog basis, no, we're not using machine learning to analyze music catalogs. In the work that we're doing, we'll take a look at the assets that go up onto the exchange and evaluate, what is happening on there. But ultimately, the valuation that relies on what's happening on the marketplace. Is there anything else you're adding with that, John? I feel like that sort of covers it, right?
Yeah, I mean, pretty straightforward question. No, we don't use machine learning, so yeah, I think that's good. Rob, you have anything you want to add to that?
Nope.
Next one here. Do you see any emerging / relatively young genres that could compete with wider genres such as hip hop, pop, rock, etc. in the future? Oof. Man, the questions today are really, really good. I mean, yes, there's always going to be new advents in technology and new advents in taste. So genre, I think, falls into that. Great example is lo-fi hip hop. I mean, like, it's what I would call the newest genre of music that's really making a splash. So yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely possible. I don't know if I could point to them specifically, like lo-fi hip hop, like it's still kind of hip hop, right? But yeah, I mean, all the time, I would say. Rob, Dayton, you guys thoughts?
I think it's probably less about genre and more about how different methods of consumption are driving like changes in what's being listened to. We touched on like what's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years. And we touched on how TikTok's affected it, the music industry just in the recent past. It's driven a rise in the consumption of catalog music, so stuff that's relatively old. So things that are a couple years old are now commanding like a larger share of the listenership relative to younger genres of music. And I feel like that's sort of like contra to, I think, what the expectation was for this sort of question, is that it's not younger, newer, emerging genres that could be driving listenership in the future. It's actually older music that you'd kind of expect to have gone through its life cycle of prime listenership in the past that now is being rediscovered or maybe recontextualized and having a second life on different channels of consumption that is driving a lot of like the new listenership.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a tough question. Rob, anything from you around genres?
No, I'm the wrong person to ask on new music trends, man. I miss bands. I want to hear a guitar solo. I feel like I never hear any of that stuff anymore. So
whatever the
I'm
kids
stuck
are
in my
listening
own
to.
past. Yeah.
Cool. All right, next question here. Can you refer to any valuation companies that I might be able to engage with on these types of assets? I don't think that we could recommend any, honestly. Robert, Dayton, what do you guys think?
My answer to this question is royalty exchange. I mean, like, we're the only public marketplace where you can go and look at what these things are transacted in. There's a wealth of data there that can show you, what the actual market is valuing these things at. So, I'll always plug us for that question.
Yeah, I will say it's not uncommon that we talk to an artist or something, and they say, well, someone told me this is worth 20 times what it earned, and they got some bum valuation from somewhere else, and we've got the market data to show you that that's not accurate. So yeah, I agree. We're probably the most transparent source. Dayton, do you have anything to add? Yeah, okay. Next one here. How does royalty exchange make money? We make money on transactions. We have a very basic fee structure. There's both a buyer fee and a seller fee, and that's really it. So yeah, it incentivizes us to make sure that the market continues for you all. So keeps our interests aligned with you guys. It keeps our interests aligned with sellers too, to make sure they can trust us, make sure that we're doing right by them and by you guys. So it's actually important that the fee structure is the way it is. We also oftentimes get asked about admin fees because we don't charge for our admin service. It's just a requirement for the market to work. It has to be a safe, trusted place. So we don't take a fee there. It's just based on transactions. Dayton, Rob, anything you guys want to add to our fee structure? Cool. How are gains from reselling music assets taxed? Assuming that these assets aren't securities, there's no cap gains tax. Tax questions are always tough. Legally, we cannot provide any sort of tax advice whatsoever regarding royalty assets, so I have to point you towards your tax advisor for that question. Some investors will claim cap gains on a sale because it is the sale of an asset, but really talk to your tax advisor. They're the only ones who can really advise you on that. Everyone does it differently. Rob, Dayton. Cool. Next question here. Do all types of royalties possess the same level of payment risk across all parties receiving streaming royalties? How could this risk differ depending on counterparty? I would say that yes, different royalty types carry different levels of risk, certainly. But I think that it's more risk based on consumption habits rather than streaming and payment stuff like that. For that, I'm talking about, like a catalog that's, music used in a TV show will carry a different risk profile than, like Drake's streaming catalog, right? But as far as counterparty risk, not really. I mean, just because we are working within established systems and mediums for collecting and paying out royalties, it's all pretty buttoned up. Rob, do you have any thoughts on counterparty risk here?
Yeah, I think if we're talking about where the royalties are coming from and who's responsible for paying them, if it's a PRO, specifically here in the U.S., these organizations have been around for almost 100 years, and I think that would decrease the risk. Any songwriter in the U.S. would be affiliated with one of the U.S. PROs. So I don't think it's from a songwriter's perspective that risk would be any different between songwriters. If it's a major label or publisher, I think that would certainly be a lower risk than an emerging label or publisher. So I think you're looking at where the actual money is coming from. I think the more established entities within the music industry probably offer a bit less on the counterparty risk side. I hope that's answers where the question is coming from.
Yeah, one other thing I might add to that is just as far as risk of asset viability on royalty exchange. We do due diligence on everything that goes live before it goes live. So we ensure that there's no bogus assignments or anything like that. Everything's saleable and legit before it goes live. So that's part of the onus we take on as being the market. So we're always covering that stuff too. Just as far as risks go. I think that just about covers it. Whoever asked that question, if we didn't get your question, just let us know. Post another question. We'll address it. Next one here. Most of your listings have quarterly payouts. Is there a way to guesstimate when the next payment comes in? A payout being 1 week away versus 11 weeks away is substantial. Yes and no. You can always see when the next payment comes out just by visiting the website of whichever company's overseeing the royalties. We'll always have a tag if it's, CSAC, ASCAP, Universal, Warner, whoever. And more often than not, you can just Google, ASCAP distribution schedule. It'll pop up. Now to the second part of your question, a payout being 1 week away versus 11 weeks away is substantial. We do not prorate our distributions. The payment date is a hard line in the sand for who gets the royalty payment. So if you buy a catalog, the next day there's a royalty distribution, you are entitled to the entirety of that distribution. You do not get the whole distribution minus 1 day. Same with on the other side. If you sell a catalog, next day there's a distribution, you get 0 of that distribution. So the time to pay out doesn't really impact what you collect. Dane or Rob, anything you guys want to add on to that?
Yeah, and if you want to take a look at our terms of use, our standard purchase agreement is linked there. It'll lay out that concept is you're entitled to the next payment regardless of when that payment was earned. So it's all based on the payment dates rather than the actual earned dates.
Next question here. There is a lifetime earning amount listed, but normally only lasts 3 years in the raw file. Is it possible to get the file reflecting the lifetime earnings? Yes. Every listing on Royalty Exchange will also have the link to download the raw data file for that catalog. That is the entirety of the royalty earnings data that we have for that. Now, keep in mind, that doesn't always necessarily mean the full life of earnings. And that's a bit outside of our control. We get data that is available. So what the seller of the asset, what they've been getting, if they had that data, we have that data. It's not uncommon for publishers to not release the full life of data. Maybe they'll only give us 5 years of data, maybe only 3 years. So that can happen sometimes. So, rest assured, you can always download the raw data file. It's always the extent of what we have available. But it may not necessarily be the full extent of all the earnings of the life of everything, just because of what we may or may not be able to get. Like, for example, if we have a 50-year-old catalog, we probably don't have 50 years worth of royalty statements in a downloadable file. It's just probably not available. Robert Dayton, any of you guys want to add to that? Last submitted one here, average LTM of sales on Royalty Exchange. We don't really look at it as far as average last 12 months earnings. I would say the median catalog sale price is like between 70 and 90K. So take that as you will. I mean, the LTM of a 90K catalog could be 9K or it could be, 20K, kind of depending on the age of it. So it's not really a factor that we consider when looking at averages. We're looking more concerned with things like dollar age, multiple paid, term, stuff like that. To clarify LTM question, I meant to ask the average LTM multiple. Also depends. Depends on the dollar age. That can have a huge impact. It can depend on what the catalog is specifically. So take, for example, the Commodore's catalog that sold, just a couple of weeks ago. I think that got like a 14 times multiple. Whereas, we've had other large dollar age catalogs up that get an 8 times multiple, right? So it really depends on the asset and what specifically is included in the asset. It depends on the dollar age. It depends on the term length, of course, right? You're not going to pay the same multiple for a 10-year deal like you would for a life of rights deal. Same with a 30-year deal. You might not pay the same multiple. So it really, really depends on the asset.
Yeah, I don't know if we've pulled the average recently. I just don't think we've looked at the
for multiple.
Yeah, that I've seen.
Dayton and I look at that stuff fairly frequently. But the fact remains, it really depends on the catalog. You know,
But do you know like what the
dollar
average,
rate
like,
aside.
you know what the average is, like just on the, generally on the marketplace?
Dave, you know the
Top
overall?
of
I
your
mean,
head?
we just looked at it the other day.
Not the
I don't
overall. I
recall.
mean, we usually look at it in the context of dollar age cohorts.
Yeah.
And also you have to bear in mind that the multiple is going to look different for the life of the asset that you're acquiring it for. So, you know, a multiple on a 10-year deal is going to be different than a multiple on a life of rights deal for the same age
Yeah.
asset.
Yeah. So even if we were to pull a site-wide average, it'd be an apples to oranges comparison for half. So that's, yeah, we look at it by dollar age cohort, term length, or that's really the two primary analysis figures. And then one more here. Thanks for answering all my questions. Special thanks to Dayton for the insights about music valuation. Rob, I would also love to hear some guitar solos.
That's very nice, anonymous attendee. Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Everything about risk takers valuations, all clear. Thanks. Happy to help. We will be publishing this recording on the site if you ever want to revisit it. I'll give a last call for questions here just as we do our sign off. So yeah, if you have them, send them in quickly as we're just about at the end here. Do you publish those stats? So those stats go to our all access members. That's our paid membership. I believe we have small access members attending right now. Yeah, so those specifically go to those paid membership. And we'll do one a month. I believe this year we're looking at multiples, or this month we're looking at multiples. So Dave and I have been pulling that data already. We've started looking at it. So that will go out at the end of the month. So we do, but not publicly. This is a microphone, Charlie. It's so you can hear me real good.
Looks like an oxygen tank. We are in Denver.
Yeah.
You never know.
All right. Anything else while we've got a few minutes here? Going once, going twice. Cool. Well, thank you all for attending. Great questions this week. Next quarter, we'll probably be doing a bit of a longer talk about the CRB stuff, depending on what kind of data we get. My name is John Gestel, Client Relations Coordinator here. With me, as always, Rob Bernhardt, Corporate Counsel, Dane O'Connor, our Lead Analyst. Thank you all for attending. This recording will be up on the site. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us. Anything we didn't address, investors@royaltyexchange.com. We are very accessible. We are here to help. And we wish you all best of luck. We'll see you all soon.
Right at an hour. Thanks,
Right
y'all.
at an hour.
See ya.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.